Okay, so I am finally going to be showing you a video today on how I do my nails using the Revel Nail Dip Powder. So I'm going to first show you all the supplies that you're going to need. Now I have a few extra supplies that you probably aren't going to need. They're not essential, so I'll show you those last. But first I'll show you the essentials. So the first thing you need is a full set of dip liquids. That is step 1, 2, and 3. This is the base coat that you put on first, and then you dip it in the powder. And then this is the step 2 where you actually activate the powder and that hardens it. And then step 3 is the top coat that you get that shiny finish with. So I get all those liquids from Revel Nail, and then you need a dip powder color. And then the last thing you're gonna need here, sorry, there's a few more things actually, is a brush. You use this after you dip to brush off any extra dip. And then you'll need a variety of nail files. Mine are all dirty and pink because of a color I used. But this one is a very gritty one. And this is kind of like a more smooth one. And then this is a buffing pad. This one is squishy. And the benefit of that is that when you're going over your nails at the end, this will allow you to get in those really fine spaces there, and it kind of conforms to your nail and will give you a nice smooth finish. Then I also have a glass file. I don't use this very much anymore, but I used to use it to kind of get in my cuticles here to make sure I have a nice cuticle line. I use this dotting tool for that now. So now into the kind of less essential tools. Oh, this one also comes with the Revel kit. This is a cuticle pusher, and I use this to kind of like prep my nails beforehand. So that's what you'll need. Now, a couple of extra things I have are a cuticle clipper. This really helps with cuticle prep. So nail prep is kind of like a whole nother video, but I use this to clipper in my cuticles a little bit. And then I push them back with this, and I file off the top coat, the top shiny layer of my nails already to get them prepped. So now to the nail prep part. My nails are looking kind of rough right now, but I want to show you what they look like. So I've already shaped them. So before you start dipping, you're gonna wanna shape your nails. I kind of am going for like a straight but slightly curved look today. And I also file them like this to get them a little bit more pointy. So if I didn't file them at this angle on the sides, they would be a lot more straight and wide, but I kind of want that sort of feminine look. So I file them like this on either side to get that nice kind of pointed shape at the ends. And you can shape them however you want. But you want to get a pretty good shape on those nails beforehand. Now, before you do anything, you have to remove the top layer of shine from your nails. So I already did this, and that top layer of shine can cause some lifting of the nails. So to get them to adhere really well, you want to remove that top layer. And I've already done that off camera. And so I've prepped my cuticles, which means I've clipped them using this. I used a little liquid cuticle remover to kind of get rid of any dead skin. And then I sort of cleaned them out with this little dotting tool I have, just to make sure my cuticles are nice and round. They're not perfect, and in fact my nails are looking a little rough right now, but you'll see that it kind of comes together. So that's the prep work I did. This one's looking a little funky. Oh yeah, that one, I'm gonna have to clean that out a tiny bit more before we start. And then I went and removed that top layer of shine. And now I'm gonna show you how to do a complete nail. So when I do my nails, I just do actually one hand at a time. And so I'll do one step on all my nails, and then do the next step on all my nails on one hand, and then the next step on all my nails on one hand, and then I'll do my other hand, same thing. And then I'll do the last step 3, the top coat, all at the same time so that they dry even. And that prevents me from going in with my second hand and using dip powder when this other hand has step 3 still drying, because it could cause some powder residue on here. So anyway, that's just my personal preferences. I do one hand at a time, except that top coat I do all together. All right, so I'm gonna open up this dip now. This is the color Agave. Hopefully you guys can see here, but I've already prepped this, so I'm just gonna go ahead and stop talking and start doing.
So now I'm just taking this cuticle pusher and I'm pushing my cuticles out of the way, and I'm going to be using the dotting tool to kind of run it along my cuticles and make sure all that crusty stuff is out of my cuticles. You want to make sure that you have a nice round clean cuticle shape. That's what's going to give you that beautiful cuticle line that looks nice and clean, and also it's going to prevent the dip from touching your cuticles and getting built up near your cuticles, which can cause lifting and also just doesn't look as good. So cuticle prep is really important, and I'm just making sure that my cuticles are all pushed out of the way and all that crusty stuff is out of there before I start dipping. I'm going to give my color a little stir just to make sure it's all mixed up real good. And now I'm going to go ahead and get started with step 1. This is your base coat, and I'm going to be building an apex, which means that you start by building a tiny thin strip down the middle before you start doing full coats, and that gives your nails a nice round shape. So I'm starting by going about halfway down the nail in a tiny strip, and I'm going to dip all my fingers with that first. I have kind of a janky pinky. It's crooked, and also I've injured it 2 different times during childhood. So this nail is a little funky and funky looking, but yeah, just ignore that janky pinky I have. After every layer of dip, you're going to want to brush off all the excess dip. You're not going to want to put another layer of the sticky base coat on if you still have a lot of loose dip. It's going to be bad for your liquids, and it's just going to be hard to apply, so make sure you brush it off really good after each step. Now I'm going in and doing another layer of building up my apex. So this time I'm starting 3/4 of the way down my nail and just doing a thin strip down my nail and then dipping in the powder. That's going to give my nails that nice beautiful arched shape, looking kind of from the straight on view, and prevent them from being flat looking. You also want to make sure that you're tapping off excess powder on the jar before you move on to the next step or brush off. So now I'm happy with this apex. This is going to give me that nice shape that I want, but there's a couple spots that bubbled up a little bit where I put a little bit too much of that base coat on. So I'm just going to go ahead and take my little buffer and buff it up a teensy bit. You want to be careful about buffing before you've activated, because sometimes it can mess up the powder, but I'm just going really, really gently to get that bubble out right there, because I don't want that to build up too much with the next few layers of dip I'm going to do. So I'm just going to gently buff that off and smooth it out a teensy bit before I move on to the next layer of dip. Now I'm going to be going in with my first full layer of dip, and this is probably the part of doing your nails that is the most difficult to learn, because you want to make sure that you're not getting anywhere near your cuticles, or you're going to end up with bad cuticle lines or a puddle of that liquid right around your cuticles, and that looks really bad and also causes lifting. So this is like the most technical part right here, is applying that base coat upon your nail without getting it on your cuticle. And this just takes a little bit of practice and skill, but I'm going to try and walk you through kind of like my best tips for getting that beautiful cuticle line. So This first layer of dip, you're going to see it didn't even go on very well. When I brushed it off, I was like, oh crap, there's all these patchy spots. That just means the base coat dried really fast, and the next few layers of dip will cover that up, and it's not a big deal. So after I dip, after every single dip, I make sure that cuticle line is looking nice and clean. So I take my little dotting tool and I go around the cuticle, make sure that there's no dip and no liquid sitting around my cuticle line, because you don't want that. So I'm just going to go around every nail now. And my tip for doing my base coat is do it as fast as possible. Make sure you don't have too much liquid. You don't want any pooling or puddling around your cuticles. So I'll usually take it and brush it out a couple times, like strokes along the nail, and then when there's a little bit less liquid on the tip of my brush, that's when I'll go and kind of fan it out around my cuticle. When you fan out the brush, it creates kind of a round shape, and I'll use that and kind of push it back into my cuticle to make sure that there's no pooling there, but that I'm getting that entire cuticle area covered in the liquid. So that's what I do to kind of spread that base coat out. And so after every base coat layer, I'm gonna go ahead and dip, and I brush it off after I can tell that it's definitely dried. I dip a few more times in the powder if it looks like the base coat is not dried all the way, because if it is just a little bit tacky and you brush it, it can cause some brush strokes there. So once I can tell it's completely covered in powder, I know it's ready to brush off, and then I'll take my dotting tool and just go around the cuticle and make sure that that line is nice and clean and that there's no buildup there. Nothing touching my cuticles. You want zero contact between cuticles and liquids and dip. This is a good example of how I'm fanning out that brush along the bottom and then pushing it toward the cuticle, not actually touching the cuticle, but getting it as close to the cuticle as I can without touching it by fanning out and kind of pushing the base coat toward the cuticle until it's completely covered and I can do that layer of dip. So I'm going to walk you through applying this base coat one more time, because this really is the most important part and what will give you those beautiful nails. So watch how I take this brush and I start at my cuticle. I just make sure there's enough liquid there, and I'm going to go along the side and then kind of draw along the other side and then fill out the nail to make sure it's completely covered. In that case, I didn't do any fanning of my brush. I just used the brush to follow along the curve of my cuticle without actually touching the cuticle. And that gives me that really nice cuticle line, making sure that the liquid never touches the cuticle. That's the most important part. Then you'll be able to use your dotting tool to kind of carve out that line after you dip and make sure that it's perfect. Honestly, this just takes a little bit of practice. I think this is like my 10th or 11th dip, and I've gotten so much better over time. So this just takes a little bit of practice and skill. You'll pick it up for sure. I want to show you how I dip in the powder. You want to make sure that you don't do it too much of that base coat, otherwise you'll get puddles on your nail, like these big bumps. But watch how I dip in and then I actually scoop up some of the powder on top. I find that helps give me just that perfect finish of the powder. That's just a personal preference for how I dip. I know some people like to lay their nail in. I just like to actually scoop it in and scoop up some of that powder and let it sit on the nail for a second or two, and then make sure that base coat has absorbed as much powder as possible. And then when I brush it off, I always get this really smooth, beautiful finish when I do that. I don't know why it is, but that's just how I do it. I dip my nail in, I scoop out some powder, let it sit for a second, and then tap off, and that works really well for me. You're going to see me go in and do a second layer of full dip on this nail again right now. Usually I do one step at a time on each nail on this hand, but I wanted to make sure that this was going to look how I wanted it because it was looking a little bit patchy, so I wanted to just do all the layers on this finger and that little pointer finger too, to make sure that it was going to look how I wanted before I moved on with recording the video. And it did it. It ended up looking great. But usually I just do one step on all my fingers before I move on to the next step. So I did that one tiny half strip at the beginning when I was building up my apex, and then that 3/4 strip when I was building up my apex. And then I'm going to be doing 3 full layers of dip. That's going to give me that really nice opaque look. It's going to make them thick and strong so that they're not breaking or feeling weak or flaking or breaking or cracking in any spots. That's my personal preference, is building up that apex with that half strip and 3/4 strip, and then doing 3 full layers of dip. That gives me exactly the look that I want, where they're strong but not thick looking at all. They look absolutely beautiful. And this is my favorite way to do this, but everybody does this a little bit different as far as how many layers they do and exactly how they build up their apex. This is just how I do it. You can also use a toothpick instead of this dotting tool. I got this dotting tool on Amazon for $5. I absolutely love it. A toothpick will totally work, but it's just a little bit flimsy. So when you get in there, sometimes you need kind of a little bit of strength in that tool, because you want to really quickly carve away some of that dip and it can start to harden really fast. And so sometimes a toothpick is a little bit flimsy, a little bit tricky. The dotting tool is better, but a toothpick will totally work for your first few times as well. Now, it's okay if when you finish these layers of dip, your nails are not perfectly smooth, because we're going to be going over them with one of those buffing blocks to make sure that they're completely smooth before we add on that top coat. Well, actually, mine are just mostly smooth, honestly. But it's really important to get a great finish on the dip without the buffing block, because if they're all lumpy and bumpy, you're going to spend forever on that last buffing step. So the more skilled that you can be with applying your base coat and the dip, it's already going to look smooth. Like you can see on my nails right now that the dip is going on really smooth. If yours is really lumpy and bumpy, you can buff that out. I've seen some incredible transformations from bumpy and crazy to totally buffed out and smooth with that buffing block or nail file. But I like to just apply my dip and base coat as smooth as possible so that I don't have to do hardly any buffing, and it just makes the look better and makes my job easier. But again, if you are getting bumps, you will probably get bumps your first few. Don't worry about that. You can buff those out after the first step of activator to get it really smooth and round and exactly the shape that you want before we apply that base coat. So I haven't applied that first step of activator yet. That's step number 2. That's what hardens this dip. I haven't done that yet, but I just very gently am going in here and smoothing out some of the tops a little bit because they're a little bit lumpy and bumpy. You want to make sure you don't buff too much before you apply the activator because the dip is not hardened yet. After we apply the activator, that's when we just go crazy with our buffing block and make sure everything is super smoothed out. Just removing a little crusty from my cuticle really fast. So now you can see that my nails are looking really good. The cuticles look round and smooth and great thanks to applying that base coat really carefully and that dotting tool. And my nails are looking really good, just like I want them to at this step. Now I'm just going to close up my step 1 and dip powder and brush off any excess powder because I want to make sure that all that excess powder is off before I apply my activator. And I'm just going to take my dotting tool really fast and clean up these cuticles a teensy bit before I apply that activator because that activator is going to harden everything in place. So this is kind of my last chance to make sure those cuticles are how I want them to look. You can also take a nail file when you're done, and you can take your nail file and file around that cuticle and round it out just a tiny bit more if you need to. That works really well, but in my case I'm just going to go around them a little bit and get any of those little crusty bits out of my cuticle line. I'm going to take my little glass tool here. I have a little spot on here that just needs a little bit of refining before I apply that activator. Just want to clean them out really good before I apply that activator. So now I'm grabbing step number 2. This is the activator. This is what hardens the dip and gives it that really nice, hard and strong finish. You want to make sure that you get it really wet. You can't overdo this step. This is like the easiest step ever. So just go ahead and apply this all over every nail. And don't forget to cap the edges a little bit. So I'm showing you my nails now. They're not perfectly smooth, but we are going to buff that out. But here's how they're looking right now after that first step of activator. You want to let that dry for 2 minutes or until they're completely dry. And once they have dried for 2 minutes, then you'll be able to go in with your nail file and your buffing block and smooth out all these lumps and bumps and give them that perfect shape before we apply the top coat. So I am going to speed up this part because it's a little boring, but basically I'm just taking each and every nail nail, looking all over it for lumps and bumps and taking all these different nail files I have, gritty, smooth, and buffing block, and just smoothing it out until I'm happy with how it looks. This is also where you can reshape your nail, so if you need to kind of shape it along the sides or the top a little bit more, you can do that at this step. So I'm just doing a quick quality check here, make sure that they're looking how I want them to. I saw a couple of funny spots on them, that's what I'm picking at. But anyway, they're looking good. They're not 100% perfect and smooth at this point, but in my experience, the top coat covers up really any imperfections. So I just let it slide if they're not perfect. And now it's time to apply my second layer of activator to completely harden the nail. And then I'm gonna let this step dry for 1 minute. You're supposed to wipe them with the paper towel at that point. I forgot to do that. But anyways, I'm applying this second layer of activator, and then after this step is dry, that's when I start applying my top coat, and we're almost done. Okay, I'm gonna blow your mind with a little fun fact here. So Revel, their liquids come in step 1, 2, and 3, and step 3 is supposed to be the top coat. But I actually use step 1 in place of step 3. It's way better for some reason. It's like pretty much the exact same formula, but it doesn't get streaky or have issues that step 3 from Revel's kit normally has. So I love using step 1 for my top coat. It dries just as fast, just as shiny, just as hard, but it doesn't have streaky issues and other problems that step 3 has. So anyway, it's time to do the top coat, but if you're me, use step 1 liquid instead of step 3 liquid because it's just better. And now that that activator has dried for 1 minute, and I forgot to wipe them off with a paper towel, but you're supposed to do that. Now it's time to apply my top coat, and I'm going to be doing that in 2 or 3 super fast strokes on each nail. It doesn't have to be perfect. That first layer of top coat just needs to go on as quick as possible, and you want to make sure the layers are not too thick. You also want to make sure that you're completely avoiding the cuticle area and the edges. You don't want the dip or the liquids to touch the cuticles at all, ever, and you want to avoid any pooling around the cuticle line or edges from the liquids because it's going to look bad and cause lifting. So just go ahead and apply this first layer of the top coat as fast as possible and on all of the nails. Now here's how they're looking after that first layer of top coat. They're going to be shiny, but not as shiny as they're going to be after the second top coat. At this point, they might be just a tiny bit dull looking, but that second layer is going to shine them right up. So you have to let this layer dry for 1 minute, and the timing here is very important. So you have to make sure that you time the second layer of activator with that first layer of the top coat and the second layer of the top coat exactly. If you get the timing off, then sometimes they don't adhere correctly and you can get streaks or weird problems. Again, I have less problems with this since I started using step 1 instead of step 3. But still make sure that you're doing that timing correctly. So this is the final step for these nails. I'm applying the second layer of top coat, and this one you can do a little bit slower. So this is where I make sure that I get right up to that cuticle line without touching it, and right around the edges of my nails. And also you can cap the edges if you want to. That just makes sure everything stays secure and as strong as possible. If you see me capping those edges there. And so I'm going to do this on all of the nails, and then I'm going to be done, and they're going to look amazing. This step is completely dry after 2 minutes. And my favorite part about these nails is that unlike regular nail polish, once they're dry, they're like really dry. I can get right back to my home and household duties, and I don't have to wait around with them being tacky for 30 minutes like I do with regular nail polish, which I just absolutely love. And that's it. Now I'm done. So now I am just looking at my beautiful nails. These will last me 2 to 3 weeks and they won't go anywhere. It's the best. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that it was helpful for you. Kind of long, but I really wanted to take you through it step by step in real time. So hope you enjoyed.